Welcome to Varta, the Indic Voice. I'm Balram Singh, the Director of Center for Indic Studies at UMass Dartmouth, and this is a collaborative program between DCTV and the Center for Indic Studies at UMass. I have my colleague C.V. Chandra joining me with our guest today, Rajiv Malhotra, who is the President of Infinity Foundation, just published a book on being different, Indian challenge to Western universalism. He just spoke yesterday at the university with the commentary by Professor Francis Clooney of Harvard University. It was a very good presentation. Today he has kindly agreed to give us some ideas about his book, and my colleague C.V. Chandra is going to begin asking some questions.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Singh. Welcome, Mr. Malhotra. We're very glad to have you with us. So your book is called Being Different, an Indian Challenge to Western Universalism. And it's dealing with this very controversial and very interesting topic of Western Universalism. Could you define that for our viewers or just talk a little bit about what it is?
Sure. You know, each civilization has its own idea of the truth of the world, of history, of philosophy, religion, ideas of law, ideas of morality. And no one has a claim to being the only one or the best one or the absolute one. But the West, having colonized the world and having so much power over everybody else, and the language of the West, English, which we are speaking, having become sort of universal, through the institutional mechanisms controlled by the West in education, in media, in policy making, and through various other means, the Western ideas have become kind of globally universal. So Western universalism is basically a term which means that the West's point of view on certain things have become universal. Now, just like a fish might not recognize water because it's so immersed in it, we are so immersed in Western universalism, including Indians, that we might not even understand that such a thing exists. We might think it is universalism, it's real universalism. So it helps us to step out. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The Chinese have created a kind of Confucian universalism using Confucian thought, Confucian ethics, Confucian modernity, which says basically that there is another way of being modern and having science and technology, but not necessarily imitating the West. And so while the Chinese are becoming very industrial and very progressive in a modern sense, they don't think that they have to Westernize in order to do that. So they can be Confucian in their identity and their sense of history and values, and yet be modern at the same time. A second example is Islam. Islam, while it hasn't achieved the same modernity as China, but Islam claims to have an alternative worldview of everything under the sun according to an Islamic philosophy. So there's certainly a Western universalism contesting that is a Chinese universalism and an Islamic universalism. So the question I was wondering is whether there's an Indian contribution to this discussion among universalisms.
All right, so your book is then a formulation of what you think that contribution is?
Yes.
All right, how would you say it in a short message?
Well, the first idea, to walk you through the logic of the book, the first thing I want to say is it's important to assert difference, because difference is a principle of the cosmos, and the only way to avoid difference is to make people homogeneous. And to make cultures homogeneous, it requires either you genocide somebody, or you enslave somebody, or you convert everybody to your point of view, or those who have an inferiority complex can start mimicking someone else, pretending to be someone else. There's a loss of diversity in any such method. So the alternative to this loss of diversity and homogenization into a single universalism is being different. So that's the title of my book, is Being Different. So that's the project of the book, is to explain why being different is important. The alternative to being different is being digested. That's the title of our next book, Being Digested.
Well, that sounds unpleasant. What does that entail?
Well, being digested is when one civilization gets digested into another and loses its own identity and its own selfhood. Sort of like a deer gets digested into a tiger, and the deer DNA disappears. There's not one molecule of deer DNA left, and the tiger has to break it down into smaller and smaller parts, and each molecule of the DNA of the deer has to be broken into parts, and then these are reassembled into tiger's DNA. So what survives is tiger's DNA, and the deer disappears. Now this has happened to civilizations. The pagans contributed so much into Christianity, the Christmas tree, Easter, a lot of things came out of the pagans, but the pagans themselves disappeared. The Native Americans contribute so much to Western culture. It's now recharacterized as Western. And there are Western pioneers and Western history of how these things came about without even giving proper credit to the source. So the digested cultures live in museums. They're not thriving. They're not living. They've been depleted of what was good about them. And I don't want Indian civilization to get digested into the West, and I feel that there is a risk that that might happen because a whole lot of appropriation and then recharacterization into the Western metaphor in Western frameworks is already happening of our tradition.
Okay,
there's
so
a huge amount of stuff that has been appropriated.
That's a very interesting argument you have, that this appropriation and digestion is already taking place. Do you think you could give some examples of that kind of thing
Sure.
that you see happening?
Sure. Well, a lot of, right here in the Massachusetts area, you have John Kabat-Zinn, who has trademarked mindfulness meditation, but actually it's Vipassana. And Vipassana meditation, which he learned and wrote about in his early years, is a Buddhist system that cannot be separated from the overall philosophy of life of Buddhism. But separating it from Buddhism, secularizing it, turning it into modern medicine, getting trademarks and patents, and getting all kinds of NIH, National Institute of Health grants and so on, has decoupled it from its roots and turned it into Western thought. Another one is Herb Benson in Harvard, who took the transcendental meditation of Maharishi and turned it into his own spin on it called the relaxation response, trademarked it, and became a thriving success. Now the issue with all this is that while in the short term it seems to popularize something without the Indian so-called baggage, which is how they rationalize why they're doing this, but in the long run you do not get the benefit of what has been left behind. A whole lot of the source tradition is left behind.
Right, it's the tip of an iceberg.
It's the tip of the iceberg, and the whole metaphysics and philosophy and cosmology and how it has to work with the soil of a plant cannot be left behind. You cannot remove the plant, wash it off the soil and replant it somewhere else without losing something. So the Indian soil, the roots have been denuded of the Indian soil, and therefore there's, in the interest of cross-fertilization, which I agree is a good idea, a lot has been left behind. Now, I don't want people to think that I'm against cross-fertilization, that I'm against the merger and integration of civilizations, because I do believe in that. But it should be done in an authentic way. The origins should be preserved, the original pioneers should be respected. New pioneers who just went to the East and brought all this, they should not be classified as the founders. In Massachusetts, they have alternate medicine. There is a curriculum of alternate medicine in classes, and they have a course in medical schools on the history of holistic healing. Now you would think that holistic healing is one thing where they would certainly acknowledge the Indian contribution. But it is all Herb Benson did this, and John Kabat-Zinn came up with that, and Stephen LaBerge came up with that, and these big people who used to have gurus who learnt at the feet of Indian masters have now abandoned those and become the founding fathers of this new science in the eyes of Westerners. So the Indian knowledge has been digested into these new Westerners. And that is, so therefore we're either being digested or we are being different.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a very interesting distinction to make, and I think one that a lot of us don't make when we're exploring these alternative, so-called alternative traditions. Now, I'm very curious, Dr. Singh, as the director for the Center for Indic Studies, you of course interact with a wide variety of organizations, from these hardcore mindfulness and alternative therapies to groups that do claim to have an indigenous Indian origin, to different kinds of groups and universities that engage with these issues of digestion in very different ways. Do you have any opinions about this this phenomenon of digestion that you see occurring? How do you navigate between these?
Well, I do deal with a lot of people, and my sense is I have two ideas, and I would like Rajiv to address them. One is, of course, we need to understand why is this need for these people to abandon, and you alluded to the fact that there is perhaps these people have to look at their Western audience, and maybe there is a feeling that there is a baggage, Indian baggage or Indian connection that has some kind of baggage. And number two is, why is there any natural process to have universalism, Eastern or Western? I mean, is there universalism? Is this an inevitable that you have to have the universalism? So my own experience is that, of course, I deal with students who are almost all of them are Western in my class, and I find them to be very genuine. And actually, I have found when I teach my Science of Kriya Yoga class, and eventually I tell them history of yoga, and the students love it. They want to know more as to how, and I think this is a very important point to address, to understand and then address, is that why these people think of the need that they have to dissociate. Because it seems like, at least from the young generation, that's not the case. They are really deeply interested because they actually are more curious to find out what else is that not being taught.
Sure. I have a theory which is also going to come out as a book called the U-turn theory. And in the U-turn theory, I trace all these people. In their early years, they were also very sincere. They were very sincere. They are not malicious people, by the way. These are not bad guys. I'm not saying they're bad guys. They went with real, genuine, in fact, rejection of the West, and really immersed themselves into the East with honesty. And many of them spent many decades doing that. The book, Being Different, is to answer the very question, what do they run into which is so different that they have to recoil and come back? In other words, how much of India can they keep assimilating such that at what point do they reach a boundary where going further they would lose a sense of who they are as Westerners? This is something very interesting. T.S. Eliot, who was a great poet, a very well-informed of Sanskrit, read a lot of the Upanishads, and a lot of his greatest poems were influenced by Hindu thought, Sanskrit literature. He at one point says that this is so profound, the Sanskrit works are so profound that it makes Western philosophers look like schoolboys. He says that. And then a little bit later he writes that in order for him to go even deep into it, he has to forget who he is in terms of being a Westerner, and he has to just jump into it, forget this preconditioning. And then he says, now I have to ponder whether I'm willing to let go and just go all the way into this tradition, or whether it's important for me to hang on to my sense of identity as a Westerner. And after contemplation, he's a very honest man. He writes a very honest note in his diary, which is published in one of our books. He says that I've decided in order for me to remain a Westerner, I have to draw the line how far I can go. So that's his U-turn moment. I call that the U-turn moment. Meaning he's reached the edge of how much he can digest, how much he can accept of the Indian stuff, because there is a fear of losing his sense of who I am. So the idea of being a Westerner and this lineage, bloodline of being a Westerner and this grand sense of history is an obstacle in going beyond a certain point. So they're trying to remain the Westerner in them, even those who admit that there's no more West and we're all global and we're all one, but deep inside there is something that they want to hang on to, and they want to have that side by side with the new knowledge they're getting from the East. And there's a tension between these two. So at that point, that's the edge which this book, Being Different, discovers.
All right. So that's, of course, a very interesting and unique idea in terms of how we understand cultural studies today, and especially in today's university and academic climate, which I think, as you say in your book, is very much focused on sameness and the similarity. So who would you suggest should be concerned about this this phenomenon, the U-turn moment, the Western universalism, and the digestion?
Okay. The Westerner who's going into this journey needs to know what he'll have to give up at some stage in order to really go all the way. And gurus don't want to tell them that, because gurus want lots of easy converts, easy disciples, without giving them a full disclosure saying that you go into yoga at some point in time, the ideas of yoga and the practice of yoga are going to collide with, for instance, the Nicene Creed in Christianity, which talks about original sin and very historical things.
So you're then assuming that most Western civilizational accomplishment and thought is predicated on a Christian,
not necessarily.
Judeo-Christian ethic?
Judeo-Christian, and then the Enlightenment movement, starting with Hegel, continues a Western chauvinism and a Western exclusive idea of historical superiority.
So then the rationalistic trend of the Enlightenment philosophers
has the same problem.
All right, it results in the same kind of phenomenon of that superiority.
Yes.
That's a very interesting kind of approach. So if that's the kind of the thrust of the Western movement, what would you say is approaching it to as the antagonist from the Indian side in Being Different?
Well, the Indians have bought into this Western universalism. The gurus have started translating Sanskrit words into English even when that distorts. For example, they've started replacing Atman with soul even though soul does not reincarnate and soul does not exist in animals or plants, and Atman does. So even though the meaning of soul is not the same as Atman, you kind of distort the meaning of Atman when you replace it with soul. It's popular to do that. It's easy to do that. It's kind of an easy way out.
All right, so you're suggesting that they do that in order to establish that
the gurus are helping helping us get digested.
All right, that's
a lot of digestion is because the gurus compromise, Deepak Chopra type people compromise. So it dilutes the tradition into digestibility. So it takes something which may not be digestible, which has its own legitimacy, which demands being respected as itself, and it brings it down like the enzymes in the stomach to a reduced form, so it's easy to digest, and that's good for the person who's facilitating. He can make a good business out of that. So I think the gurus are into this, and as far as Indian intellectuals are concerned, they are so anglicized in their education. All the universities in India, they're teaching Western philosophy in the philosophy departments, Western anthropology models being applied now by Indians, the Western models of history and sociology being applied. So in the humanities, the Western universalism has sort of become entrenched, and I call that mental colonization. So so I would say the resistance does not exist, and I am trying to create that resistance by writing this book.
Okay, I see. So then the book is written and the groundwork is laid for this revolution. Now, how do you envision that taking place? Let's say that we see a copy of your book in the hands of most university students. What kind of changes do you anticipate taking place?
I just came from a month-long tour of India, and I had 15 events.
Okay.
So University of Delhi has decided to adopt this book for their MA class, starting in 2012.
Congratulations.
So I expect, and IIT Kanpur, IIT Madras really liked it, Amrita University, so 3 or 4 academic institutions really liked it, and I'm invited back to several more academic institutions, including Banaras Hindu University, IIT Kharagpur in my next trip, which is in January. So one segment of people that I'm able to get into already, even in 1 month, is the academy, certain parts of the academy. The second group are gurus. I had 4 guru movements invite me and teach their students who are now going to become swamis and acharyas in the next few years. And these are not sort of trivial people, they are very big name people.
Oh, they're very
influential.
So
I was very influential. I spent many hours giving a seminar on how you should keep certain things non-translated, how you should reverse the gaze and understand the West on your own terms. And we have a Sanskrit word, purva paksha, which means my view of the other. And this is an old technique of debating among different schools within India. So we should do Purva Paksha of the West, is what I have told them. And we should have comparative religion, comparative philosophy, different ideas of history taught to our next generation of spiritual leaders. So the fact that these gurus are taking this matter seriously and inviting me back to teach more is a good sign. I think that as India rises in material terms and in business terms, there is also a renewed self-confidence to discover who we really are and throw away the colonial model that we've been taught. So the third group that like this are people in the corporate world. So I was hosted by a few corporate groups and groups of industrialists, businessmen, who want to know that when we are on the world stage, which Indian businesses are, when we go on the world stage and we negotiate with Americans, with Chinese, with Japanese, with French and Russians, each of them have a sense of who they are in terms of their distinctiveness. The Russian is not wanting to be mixed as an Englishman. He's very clear on what it means to be a Russian. The Chinese is very sure about his sense of what Chinese means, its history, its ideology. Japanese, no matter how progressive and how modernized they are still very Japanese in their culture. So who are we, they want to know. Our Indians want to know. Who are we when they are all being themselves? Who are we? And the fact that they have this need, that they have this desire to understand, that they think that the question is a valid question, and they're inviting people like me, is very encouraging. So I would say that the market for this type of thinking starts with the academy and the gurus and the corporate professionals.
All right, so you really, it sounds like you've really tapped into the zeitgeist of our time and kind of a sea change in the way that we're looking at these new things. But for the majority of us who are, in classrooms and schools and just anywhere else where Western universalism is still very present, what kind of advice would you have for how to push back against it in our own lives in what could seem like a more minor way?
So first, get my book and read it.
All right.
Okay?
and where can we do that?
And you go to www.beingdifferentbook.com.
Okay,
One word,
Being Different
book. The word book is important. It's beingdifferentbook.com because being different was already taken. So beingdifferentbook.com. And there you'll see excerpts, you'll see a lot of videos. You can actually spend 10 hours just watching videos of discussions, debates, like last night's discussion with the Harvard professor. We're going to put it up in a few days. I had a discussion with Mark Tully, famous BBC correspondent in India, and he talked as an Anglican member of the Anglican Church, very openly, very proudly, and I talked as a Hindu, and we had a 1.5 hour conversation on being different. So a lot of information you can get by watching these videos and the various material posted there, and the book is available. You can click and buy the book.
Okay.
I think that's the first step, because the book is very, I believe that these are very original, out-of-the-box, new ideas on what's different about us. And it's not political, so I'm not asking people to join, to have anything to do with any political movement or political organization. This is more philosophy. So it's a philosophical view on how we are different, and in our lifestyle how we are different, rather than a political mobilization.
Okay, that's very interesting. So now if that's okay, since we've gotten some information about the book and about your philosophy, I'm sure our viewers would like to see a little bit more about your background, and I personally am very curious, what kind of experiences, is there any experience in particular that you've had that inspired you to write Being Different, or to write, I know you're the author of 2 other books, Breaking India, and then you were also the inspiration for Invading the Sacred, which were both very influential works in the same vein. So what inspired you to go into this field and to pick up this subject?
Well, I left my corporate world and my business life when I was 44, and I decided that instead of doing more of the same, I should discover life in a bigger sense. And I hadn't been formally trained in the humanities. I wanted to learn about myself and my spiritual tradition and history. And I started a foundation with my own money called the Infinity Foundation. And first we did this experiment of funding a whole lot of academic people, thinking that we'll get the right people and then they'll do this work. But I found that I was more imaginative than them, able to think out of the box. And besides the lack of imagination, there's also a lack of courage. And the Western academics tend to be very much into one box, one discipline, one set of theories, and they are scared of sort of moving out of it. A few visionaries are like that, but many of them are very boxed in. So I found after 10 years of experimenting with many kinds of academic people, many conferences, I decided that I should start doing this myself. And so I started writing blogs, which were very successful, started giving talks and PowerPoint presentations, which were very well received, and in the last 3-4 years started writing books. So I am actually self-taught and have developed these ideas by a lot of argumentation with people from various ideological points of view who are in the academy. And since I don't have to pursue a career, I don't have to please anybody, I don't have to spend a whole lot of time in administrative work, so I can get up at 5 in the morning and read and research and spend 12-13 hours a day, 7 days a week doing this kind of research, which is a bit of a luxury because people in the academy would not have that kind of time and freedom to do so much research. So I've been doing this for 17 years now, and these books are the product of my own discoveries and my own findings.
Okay, and I think...
I just want to know, if you succeed, what will be the result? Would we have, in addition to Western universalism, Islamic universalism, Chinese universalism, Japanese universalism, we will have one more universalism?
No, we will have our contribution at the table as an equal, where we have a tradition of looking at things a certain way. Our idea of medicine, our idea of human physiology, mind, consciousness, cosmos, animal rights, environmentalism, teamwork, human rights, all of these things, leadership, our models of the way the world is, the way humanity is, would be then put on the table on par with everybody else and considered as something worth looking into, and looking into critically, rejecting what doesn't work and accepting what does work. And the idea, and I don't think that our tradition is frozen. This is one of the very important points. I don't think that it's a frozen thing that you can just mine it. Like in a mine, the amount of gold or amount of iron ore is fixed. It's not like a tree which is growing on growing. So it's not organic, it's fixed. So you can mine it and deplete it. But a civilization is, our civilization continues to evolve, continues to produce new fruit. If you keep nurturing the roots, the trees of Indian civilization is producing new fruits and new harvests all the time. So my idea is to revive the roots of our civilization so that for the modern era it's producing fruits which are relevant for today. today's health crisis, today's preventive medicine, today's like instead of people on Prozac and on Valium and all these mental health things, what does our tradition offer by way of sadhana and practices to create mental stability and harmony? So we have solutions. We are not the only ones who have solutions, and we certainly also have a lot of problems that we should deal with. But all of this should be put on the table on par for every civilization, nothing specific for us. It should be the Islamic people and the Native American people, and the Chinese, the Westerners. They should all be involved in a kind of cross-fertilization and dialogue of civilization. So that's what I would like to see.
So that's very interesting that you should ask that question, Dr. Singh, because I know a lot of scholars have said that this dialogue of cross-cultural civilizational paradigms should be advanced, but India and Indic civilization has historically been one of the most recent to join this, and one which is still very underrepresented in the dialogue of civilizations, as I'm sure you would agree. Do you have any insights as to why that might be the case? Yes,
because when I started this project 15, 17 years ago, India was represented or misrepresented by those Indians who are the heavily colonized, the post-colonial scholars, the very far left kind of people, who hated the classical Indian civilization, who considered this to be religion rather than dharma. Dharma is not to be translated as religion. It's one of the non-translatables. So all of Marx's critique of religion, they just simply applied it to the dharma traditions. And so they had...
Which is, of course, detrimental because most of Indian civilization is rooted in these dharmic traditions.
Correct.
Is it right?
Correct. So the colonial hatred for the civilization also got into these guys. And while they were post-colonialists in the sense they were criticizing colonialism for its material and physical interference and devastation, but in terms of philosophical ideas, they were not learned in Sanskrit or the Sanskrit texts, did not understand the Dharma traditions. Generally, they were alienated from that. They were very anglicized kind of people. So they were all over the United States and Europe in various departments of South Asian studies, speaking for us, representing us. Most of them are still there, very prominent people. There's some people in Harvard, for example, who are of Indian origin, and they're very prominent people. So these people became the ambassadors of Indian civilization, and therefore the problem got worse. And there's still people who think that the problem that India has is that there is too much baggage of old civilization which we should get rid of. And while I agree that there are a lot of problems...
So people are actually, you think, trying to jettison that identity which makes us different.
Yes, and they are very... And if I talk in favor of Indian civilization, they think I must belong to some political party that is some Hindutva political party, and they accuse you and they brand you. But there is a decoupling of politics. You can leave the politics behind, and you can talk about a civilization's knowledge system. So when I talk about the Dharma, I'm not talking about it as a political movement today, but I'm talking about it as a classical knowledge system, like there's Greek thought. Nobody thinks that you're a member of a political party if you think of Plato or Socrates or somebody or Aristotle.
Now that would be a political party we might all consider signing up.
Right. So I feel that there is a dharmic civilizational worldview which ought to be studied as a knowledge system, not get into any politics.
Okay, so you want to distance that aspect from politics. It sounds like you believe that politics was actually part of what led to this problem.
Politics has made it worse because politics has tainted and brought a lot of branding. So it's become very difficult for a guy like me to talk about the qualities of my civilization without somebody being very suspicious that maybe he speaks for BJP and maybe unofficially, somehow indirectly, maybe he's helping them. So this is very irritating to constantly say, well, you know, you got to understand a knowledge system of a certain country. Like in Delhi, they asked me, why do you want to call it Indian civilization? If these are universal things, why? I said, because there is a Greek civilization, there is a Chinese civilization, and the place where it originated is not the place where its effects are limited. Its effects are all over the world, and they should be all over the world, but you give a name based on where the civilization originated. There is definitely French culture. They teach it in your universities. There's Italian cuisine. Why do you call it Italian cuisine? Why don't you just call it spaghetti? So the point is that things are named after their origin. And why? And I reversed it back to the gentleman and said, why do you have an inferiority complex about Indian civilization in a positive sense? And the guy couldn't answer that.
Okay, so it sounds then you feel that we need a renaissance of Indian scholars who are not feeling the need to distance themselves from the roots and the psychological and historical roots of these traditions. So here we're coming to kind of an interesting conundrum in Indic studies, which I know that we've spoken about a lot at the Center for Indic Studies, and that is, how does this Indic voice get created, especially considering the huge diversity within the Indic traditions, and the lack of, say, a chain of succession like the Nicene
central
Creed
authority
and things like this.
No central authority.
It's not a monolithic
so
block, so how does
obviously
that get created?
I churned that issue very widely in my own mind. Who is the Indian voice and what is the Indian point of view?
Right, and who's the arbiter of this Indic identity that's being created?
And when there's so many views. So the way I answered it is not the normal way. The normal way is you get all the Indian schools together and try to build some harmony, and that hasn't worked. So I never tried that.
Okay.
People criticize me for, why didn't you go and have a council of all the dharmas? I said, because it didn't work for thousands of years. I'm not going to try that. You can please try that. My method is a very different method. My method is that if I want to figure out what's common among the Dharma traditions, I will ignore that question. I will instead ask, how are we different from others? And maybe the way we are different from others is common amongst us.
Okay, so you would establish commonalities by distinguishing ourselves.
That is called the Purva Paksha method, which means I study the other. So by studying the other, I found that the core DNA of Christianity is the Nicene Creed. And I found that the Nicene Creed is incompatible with karma and reincarnation.
Okay.
So then I found that all the Indian traditions share karma and reincarnation. So where we are common is how we are different from someone else.
Okay, and then there we have a tenet of the Indic voice established.
So that's one point. So like that, I've discovered 4 different major areas of commonality within the Indic traditions and difference with respect to the West.
Okay.
And those are 4 major chapters.
Could you briefly detail those 4?
Well,
ideas?
one is the Western is history-centric. In other words, the prophetic history is very important. And in all the Indian traditions, you can raise your level of consciousness through various traditions, various techniques, which people may disagree with them, but they all claim there are some techniques. And these are ahistorical. So the recovery of the highest level of consciousness available to each and every person, what we call Satchitanand, that is very different from the history-centrism of the West.
So this is then an experiential or a phenomenological
what I call
approach,
embodied knowing.
Embodied knowing.
Embodied knowing, that's the term.
As
opposed
juxtaposed to historical
history-centrism.
History-centrism.
Second one is integral unity versus synthetic unity. So the unifying things in the Indian tradition is very, very strong. And that's why, and that's to be contrasted with, say, the synthetic nature of reality, the synthetic nature of knowledge, the synthetic nature of the individual in the Western thought. So even Westerners, the model of the body is a synthetic unity of parts, whereas the holistic idea is very different, it's integral unity.
Okay.
And while the Indian approach to dance is integrally unified with philosophy, and music is integrally unified with philosophy, Western dance, Western philosophy got nothing to do with each other. Sanskrit contains the unity of all philosophy in it, all the philosophy, and all the performing arts also in it. So you'll find that the equivalent of humanities in the Indian system are integrally unified and not just interdisciplinary and put together in that way. So that's the second one. The third one is the attitude towards chaos. How Indians handle chaos, or what the Westerners call chaos, is very different than what Westerners how they handle chaos. And that's probably one of the most exciting chapters in this book, and that's chapter 4. Comfort with chaos, comfort with uncertainty, ambiguity, doubt. I was interviewed by ABC News for their Sunday program at the Kumbh Mela, and the guy asked me the question, how do I go and explain to the Americans all this chaos? So I said, well, you know, the chaos in your mind, because it's cognitive overload that you are facing. There is so much complexity beyond your models. Your models cannot fit all this complexity. So because your model crashes, you're calling it chaos. But if you go around asking the various individuals, you know, they are all doing their thing. They don't think there's any chaos. They're pretty happy going about doing what they're doing. You watching them are finding chaos. He found it so interesting that what was supposed to be a 5-minute interview went on for 3 hours. So a large part of their documentary was on my discussion, because I reversed the gaze and put the cause of this chaos feeling not on the object that they're looking at, but on the subject who is doing this looking. And I find this comfort with multiplicity, many threads going on, multitasking. In an Indian meeting, A is talking to B, C is talking to D, E is listening to A and talking to F. And the Westerners sitting there are very confused about what's all this going on, what is happening. So in my business world, I found that when I would have these kind of meetings, and the meeting's over, the Westerners would come to, the Indians had all filtered out because they can do many things and filter out what's relevant and make it cut, paste, figure it out. And the Westerner would come to me and ask, you know, what happened? I'm confused. What's going on? What did we decide? Because this guy said this and then this guy said that. So there is a certain discomfort with what they would consider chaos. They want things to be linear. They want things to be simple. So that's the third one. And the fourth one is the non-translatability of Sanskrit words.
Okay.
That there's a reason for it, because mantra is vibrational and you cannot translate it. You cannot replace one mantra with another, because each vibration has a distinct effect. Like each chemical would have a different effect. You cannot just
so the sound and the substance of the mantra
Yes.
is just as important as the meaning.
As the meaning. And so I've given examples of 20 or 25 non-translatables in this book in chapter 5. And I intend to take that out and make a whole volume out of that. So these are some building blocks and solid pillars of what is different and non-digestible into the West. The only way to assimilate this is to distort it and make it digestible. And I'm trying to resist the digestion by keeping that authentic stuff.
Okay, well, I think that it sounds like you're off to a wonderful start, and I hope that as much as we can and our viewers can, we can help you in that mission to prevent the digestibility. And of course, you said we can buy the book at beingdifferentbook.com.
Yes, I would love to have more people buy it. And in that, you can also join the discussion. We have 2,000 people already involved in discussing this book online. So people can join the discussion and email to me, and I'd be delighted to respond to your questions.
Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk
Thank you
to
for
us.
having
And
me here.
thank you as always to Dr. Singh for hosting us. It's been a pleasure discussing this book with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rajiv, and thank you, Sivi. And this was another edition of Varta, the Indic Voice. Soon we will be back again with an additional session of Varta, the Indic Voice. Thank you very much.